of the Exploring the Bible podcast. Been working on this for, some might say a year, some might say a lifetime. Very excited about launching this podcast in which we will be exploring the Bible from a modern perspective. We'll be looking at how it can affect and impact our life. This is a live stream going out on YouTube and on Facebook, and we expect that in future episodes we'll expand that. So thanks to everyone who showed up here tonight. There's also a team of supporters helping with this. We'll just launch right into it and see how it goes. I will start by sharing some of the information about what this podcast is all about, and then we'll actually get into some of the material for tonight. And hopefully we'll also hear from some of you as to what interests you, what you are or are not getting out of it, and how we can improve on it. So this is the overall title. My name is Wade Fransson. I'm the founder of Something or Other Publishing. We'll start with 5 W's because we want this to be engaging, entertaining, but very fact-based. And these are some of the questions that you'll have right off the bat going into this. 5 W's coming from the field of journalism. What the heck is this? What is this thing that you're now watching? Exploring the Bible is a video podcast that outrageously and unrepentantly believes in the crazy idea that the ancient writings of the Bible not only have relevance in today's enlightened postmodern world, but that they are living and authoritative. What does that mean? They have authority. They continue to come from a source of knowledge, of supremacy, of meaning, of relevance. They are living in the fact that you can read them today and they can have a viable power in your life in the same way that they did at the time they were written. Who is this? My name is Wade Fransson. I'm an author. I'm the founder of Something or Other Publishing. Written in third person here. I have a degree in theology, but also an MBA. Going back in time, when I got that degree, I was very much interested in a spiritual direction and working within a nonprofit environment to make a difference, to work, in fact, as an ordained minister. Years later, I went a different route, needing to provide for a family, and thus the MBA. The organization that I was a Christian minister with is called the Worldwide Church of God. Some of you may know of this organization, which basically no longer exists, but at the time it was a fairly dominant force, especially in America, but also globally, in that it had the #1 rated radio show for many decades, the #1 rated television program in the United States of a religious nature. And it sought to accomplish certain goals and objectives of which I very much identified with and was aligned with at that time. I resigned from the Worldwide Church of God in 1995, and thus the path then into business and an MBA to provide for my family. Along the way, of course, my perspectives were changed and altered by entering into the corporate world, the business world, and looking at things from that perspective. Over the course of this podcast, some of those experiences will become very relevant depending on which topic we're covering at a given time. Where is this? Well, I'm not originally from the heartland, or in fact, even from the United States, but I'm a naturalized US citizen living in Madison, Wisconsin. The video podcast is live streamed, as I mentioned, on multiple platforms, and we assume already has a global audience based on the people that we saw waiting and the people that have been invited and the people that have been watching some of the presentations that I've been asked to give on various sites and various programs. When is this? Every first and third Tuesday of the month at this time, 6 p.m. Central Time. You can tune in, whether it's on Facebook, whether it's through YouTube, or over time as we maybe invite some of you even into the studio to have discussions, Q&A, and antics related to the topics that we're discussing. Why do this? Perhaps the most important of those W's. For the last 300 plus years, the Bible and the faith of billions of global citizens who have placed their faith in that book, it and those people have been under relentless attack. This collection of ancient writings was once viewed as being God-breathed, as emanating and coming directly from God through his messengers over time. And it was viewed as being authoritative. It was viewed as being a guiding light and a trustworthy lens through which we could examine our world, examine our circumstances and the choices we make on a daily basis. Since the Enlightenment, and in fact, in many ways, it's a great term, it's an accurate term, the awareness, the knowledge, the mental faculties of mankind, humankind, been trained to discover the secrets of the second book of Revelation. The first book of Revelation I'm referring to is the Word of God, the Bible, and any other ways in which God has communicated directly to mankind. The second book of Revelation is, in fact, the creation itself. The creation itself has untold mysteries contained within it. And we have indeed been educated and trained. We've been given light and guidance over the last 300 years in our ability to examine that second book of Revelation, to tap into it, to unlock many of its secrets. So indeed, it is a very correct term to call it the Enlightenment. I'm not disrespecting the Enlightenment or the knowledge and the awareness and the understanding that mankind has gained in the last 300 plus years. But unfortunately, in my opinion, because those studying that second book of Revelation have in many cases, in their oftentimes vanity and arrogance, used what they learned to deny the fact that it is in fact God that created that book that they are studying. And it was God that gave them the ability to understand it. It was God that gave them the ability to unlock its secrets. And rather than celebrating the source of that knowledge, the source of that revelation, they worked to deny the existence of such a creator, of such a revealer. And so we do this, we present this podcast, this Exploring the Bible podcast, in an effort to bring some alignment, to bring some balance, to regain the perspective that what we are learning as a species is in fact coming from a divine creator who is seeking to work with us, who is seeking to reach us, who is seeking to message us, and seeking to have us listen and learn. This podcast seeks to pursue those and many other goals. It is sadly no longer the case, unfortunately, that billions of people look at the Bible as God-breathed. I remember in some of my early experiences when I was privileged to go on an archaeological expedition to the city of David, and at that time was subscribing to the Biblical Archaeology Review, because that was the field of research that I was involved in there for a brief period of time. And again, having the honor to go and study at that, or participate in that very prestigious archaeological dig. It just amazed me to learn in my reading of Biblical Archaeology Review that many of the contributors back then would make their careers based on having discovered something that allowed them to challenge the Bible, that allowed them to represent that the Bible had been exaggerated or inaccurate and could not be trusted. When years later, the case that they had made was overturned by further research, the career of said brilliant archaeologist who falsely claimed that their research had uncovered that the Bible was in error, there was no retraction made in any major way. Their career was not undone. The fact that they had built a reputation based on being a successful challenger against the Bible That never happened. Instead, in the popular imagination and in the field, it was just granted and given that they had successfully shown the Bible to be inaccurate. And the constant paper cuts, if you will, or bruises and ripped pages that resulted as that Bible was attacked. There was never a recovery from that. And sadly, over the course of hundreds of years, people no longer care about what's in this great collection of ancient literature. We'll look into why that is and what we should do about it. What approach will we take? The Exploring the Bible podcast is intended to be an open-minded approach to applying the ancient texts, collectively called the Bible, to our modern world. Input is welcome from all walks of faith, wherever participants find themselves. But specifically, the input we're looking for is from walks of faith. The purpose here is not to argue with those people who don't believe in the Bible and who are hell-bent on proving that it should be mistrusted. We want certainly a degree of skepticism to be introduced on any given idea, any given perspective, any given interpretation. But we're not looking to stage some kind of battle in order to prove to the unbeliever that God exists, which in my opinion is a futile effort. I believe that God is powerful enough to have magnificently given all the evidence that is needed for anyone that is truly searching for him to find him. But at the same time, make it difficult enough to find him, such that anyone who's not serious about it, anyone who's not diligently and sincerely seeking to find God, will always, always, always have enough evidence to prove themselves right. Thus, God is the most manifest of the manifest and the most hidden of the hidden, if you will. Anyone who really seeks to find God will. Anyone who really seeks to find what he is doing on this earth can figure it out. Knock and it shall be opened to you comes to mind. Ask and it shall be given. But anyone who seeks to prove and deny, they shall be successful in their own attempts to convince themselves, and unfortunately many others who wish to listen to them, that in fact God doesn't exist. So I say therefore that input is welcome from all walks of faith. It really doesn't matter where you're coming from. It really doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you have the attitude of a seeker, the attitude of somebody willing to see if there might be something there. I'm not interested in having people join this discussion who are trying to prove us wrong when we say that the Bible comes from God. But if you're open to exploring it, we'll give plenty of evidence, even for those who are somewhat more incredulous, somewhat more skeptical. There is scholarship behind this podcast. Research is done, and we are looking at texts, and there are many people who will be very quick to call me out anytime I wander off too far from awareness of a scholarly perspective. But our intent is not to take a scholarly approach to delivery during the presentation or to the discussion that happens here. In some cases outside of this podcast as well. Certainly we're very interested in scholarship, and some scholarly discussion is very valuable. But this is more of a practical approach, more of a layman's approach than a scholar's approach. Our primary textbook is and will be the Bible, but all relevant input is welcome to any topic. Sometimes that input may be flawed or even contested, but that's the nature of exploration. This podcast presumes that we need to go beyond convention and accepted explanations. We need to pose hypotheses and theories that can be, tested based on the writings, based on scholarship, based on input, based on experience, such that they can lead to new insights. If we don't go off the trail, we'll never find anything new. And this is ground that has been traveled for centuries. And brighter minds than me, you, or anyone else listening to this have devoted their whole lives in a pursuit of scholarly attainment. We're less interested in that and more interested in what is God telling me to do today in my life, in my choices, in my decisions. How am I meant to view the world around me through the lens of what the Bible reveals to me? Along the way, we will be sometimes led to detours, dead ends, or even toxic swamps. It's to be expected when you're exploring. We will remain curious but detached, open but discerning, at times credulous, which for those who may not know means you'll fall easily for whatever you're being told. You'll readily believe it. At times, very open to just learning and drinking in the perspective that's provided. But other times we will be skeptical or dubious of what's being presented. The primary fulcrum for analysis, or the weight of the balance of how we discern, will in fact be the Bible. But since I'm the presenter and this is my podcast, it will definitely be filtered through my own lifetime of research and personal experience. How deep does that go? It goes to experiences that are dramatic, life-changing, that happened on multiple continents, many different countries, many sort of almost unbelievable events, such as some behind the Iron Curtain, some in backwater India, some in apartheid South Africa, some in Alaska, where I lived in a tent for almost a year in 20 below weather, and through many outrageously unique life's circumstances, always, always, always asking, why am I in this mess? What is going on here in my life, and what lesson can I learn from it? Looking to the Bible largely to give me those answers throughout my life. Various viewers may from time to time object to my decisions on when to be credulous and accept a given perspective that is going to be presented in the form of input or documentation, and when to be skeptical or dubious. That's to be expected. We're not all the same. We're all going to make different decisions, and sometimes, you may or may not radically agree or radically disagree with it. But let's explore it together. Let's be open to listening, and hopefully, whenever those circumstances happen, you won't be so furious that you'll stop participating, but rather will continue to participate and provide your perspective that may in fact end up being the right one over time. Who knows? But bottom line, it's my podcast, not those who would object to what I'm doing. And anyone is free to do their own if they really feel strongly that it should be done in a different way. Do I have an SPS? What's an SPS? It's a specific purpose statement. That's a throwback to some of my audience who go way back to early speech training that we had in undergraduate theology degree studies. The SPS, the specific purpose statement, is simply to know the Bible, the Old and New Testaments, both, as the Word of God, to recognize their authority, their relevance, their credibility, their power, the living nature of those writings as the Word of God. Further, here's just a quote that I've pulled from a source that's near and dear to me about what it is we're trying to accomplish. But whether through deeds or words, the merit of your every contribution, and this is speaking to us, any of us who would look to the Word of God and try to apply it in our lives, whether through deeds or words, the merit of your every contribution to social well-being lies first in your resolute commitment to discover that precious point of unity where contrasting perspectives overlap and around which contending peoples can coalesce. Now, why am I quoting this particular quote? Because this podcast is not about me trying to prove that I'm right or that my knowledge is superior or that I have some kind of spiritual or moral preeminence that gives me a right to do this. I'm just a person who has dedicated his life to following God. Along with all of you, I've had my ups and downs, my meanderings around. Ultimately, your perspective and what you've seen and what you've learned may have given you greater insight and knowledge. What you have to offer may be more accurate, more correct, more right in that sense than what I have to offer. And we may, in fact, be looking at the elephant from two completely different sides. You may be describing the trunk, and I may be describing the leg, to use that analogy of different blind people evaluating an elephant, or perhaps I should say visually challenged people. My apologies. Examining an elephant and coming up with a completely different conclusion. Or perhaps we understand what the elephant is, but we have a completely different idea of how that elephant should be treated, or to what use it should be put, or whether we should tether the baby elephant to a stake, limiting its potential as an adult so that it can be used for our purposes, for those who know that little analogy. My point is simply this: contending peoples doesn't mean that one is right and one is wrong. It means they have a different perspective. They may both be wrong, in fact, and the truth often lies somewhere in the middle. Or one point, one side might have the right concept, but the other side might have the right application of that concept. But as long as they're fighting, no good will ever come from it. So when we're looking at something like the Bible, how many different sects, how many different splinters of groups have there been? Going way back into time, or more recently in my own experience, my first book, The People of the Sign, chronicles a massive, nasty hijacking and divorce that happened in two ways. In my personal life, going back to my childhood, but then later in my religious life, where the religious group that I was a part of, that I was supporting, that I was a minister in, began to have differences of opinions, and the leadership of the church took the church in one direction, and a large portion of the membership wanted to go in a different direction, and it was ripped right down the middle, and all the people had to choose a side. And in the end, these squabbling peoples were ejected sort of out into public view, and thereby, in my view, proving that they didn't really understand, that we didn't really understand what the Bible was all about anyway. And no matter how much we were certain that we were right, we were all wrong. So the point here is not to take sides, to form calcified positions, to attack the positions of others, but rather find points of agreement, going to the Word of God, which is a living, breathing motivator of human behavior and human intentions that should lead us to greater love, to greater unity, and to ever greater heights of achievement as we seek to apply the Word of God in our lives. What about participation? How does that work? Raise your virtual hand, put something into the chat. We'll figure it out as we go. Right now, tonight, I've got some of the equipment I need to really do this. Got a very wonderful microphone sitting here next to me that I can't use because of some missing components. I have 4 monitors live in my home office here, none of which I can hook up to use as a second monitor without certain cables or software. So, we'll move into this over time in terms of how to engage the expanding audience. But give it your best shot, raise a virtual hand, put something into the chat. We'll try to get your questions answered as we go. What will we cover in this podcast series? Well, what won't we cover? We will be all over the map. We will Rambo our way through the Bible, through theology, and over time, we'll cover a wide variety of hopefully very interesting and enlightening topics. But we'll start at the beginning, at the book of Genesis. But we'll do so with the benefit of hindsight. As I mentioned, we'll use scholarship, we'll use history, we'll actually use a lot of science to explore it carefully. As we do, you may reach the early conclusion that my view of eschatology, which is the study of the last days, the end times, the apocalyptic events surrounding Jesus' return, that kind of stuff, my view of all these topics has a strong fundamentalist character. But that would be an oversimplification. We have the advantage of many, many discoveries in recent decades that will illumine what we will read, even about the very earliest verses of the Bible. But that's where we'll start. And don't think for one second that that's going to be boring or the study of ancient history. It's very alive and vibrant and has immense relevance to our day. We will also explore what it means for us as a planet, as a species, as an emerging advanced civilization, calling out both the promises that are laid down in this book of books, this collection of 66 different books collected into one over time, over centuries, over millennia. We'll call out the promises and the warnings, and we'll examine how we are doing as a species, as a society, what course corrections we need to make as individuals and as a collective. How does this book provide insight and guidance into current events that are facing us? And again, the decisions we have to make in our families, in our schools, and in our society. So, by way of a sort of a lighthearted introduction to this general topic, did you know that we survived? There was some doubt, not only that I'd be able to give this podcast tonight, but that there would be anyone able to view it. We were at risk because less than 2 hours ago, we narrowly avoided a kilometer-wide asteroid known as 7482 1994 PC1, which hurtled past us with enough mass and speed to theoretically wipe out much, if not all, of our species. Bear with me for a moment while I struggle with technology hurdles to try to give you a little interesting, somewhat dramatic, if simple, representation of this. Let's see if I can do this here. There we have it. You'll have to bear with me as we watch it come around again. This is a representation of what this asteroid discovered in 1994 did just a few hours ago. The yellow dot in the middle is the sun. The blue dot circling around is the Earth. The magenta dot about to strike the Earth right there, that is the 7482 1994 PC1 asteroid, which, as you can see from this representation, narrowly missed the Earth. Of course, narrow in this case and at this scale means it was 1.2 million miles. That didn't stop my kids from taking the knowledge of this, which we came across as yesterday on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We were together with some friends doing a space trivia game. And as a result of a dispute in which one of the questions had to do with Pluto being a planet or not, and we were looking at the box, when was this made? And the teenager in question was making her best guess as to whether Pluto should be considered a planet or not. And in the light of people Googling and asking Siri for information on this and correlating, triangulating the name of the box with when Pluto to try to formulate a final answer. By the way, the girl got it wrong, according to the box, because she miscalculated exactly when Pluto was downgraded for a planet and when the box came out. Turns out they probably had to issue a new set of trivia cards as a result of that downgrading. But in any case, in light of that, we discovered that this asteroid was hurtling towards Earth, which led to my children, of course, learning about the asteroid so they could present to their teachers at school today why they didn't need to do their homework because they wouldn't be around to turn it in tomorrow. My own personal take on this was that that's great. Let's go ahead. I went along with that. I agreed with them because let's transfer all the fear related to the pandemic over to this asteroid hurtling towards Earth. And once we get everybody really frightened about the asteroid, when it safely passes by at 1.2 million miles and actually doesn't hit the Earth, we can all forget that there's a pandemic and we can let all that fear subside. It will have been vaporized by our near-death miss with the asteroid. Naturally, I'm being somewhat lighthearted. I hope no one will take offense here. My point is, doomsday predictions have always been around. They've always been a part of the Bible. And promises and doomsday predictions are something we're not going to be shying away from. We are not going to be afraid of addressing these topics as we get into the material. So let's go back to the slides and work through the rest of the material we have for tonight, and then open this up to some Q&A. Many of the stories and prophecies of the Bible, as I mentioned, have this doomsday quality, the Noachian flood, the plagues of Revelation. But do we realize that many of these apocalyptic warnings are actually time-stamped? They're not just vague swords of Damocles hanging over mankind at all times. If you really do care and are concerned, you might find that you can get greater clarity than you thought. Not only does the Bible give us the confidence, the faith, the certitude to know that God is with us and that our ultimate fate and our future is secure, that we don't need to be worried and panic-stricken about the events that come around us, or overly concerned about our death or the death even of our loved ones, and the fact that they are resting secure in the bosom of God, and that they will be taken care of, and that we will be reunited with them. The Bible gives us all of this confidence and certitude, but it also maps out with great specificity these apocalyptic warnings in terms of time, as we'll see shortly. Is this the reason, perhaps, that our species has always studied the stars? Or does it have more to do with those internally far-reaching questions, such as, who am I? Where did I come from? What's it all about? Does what I do matter? What kind of person should I be? We'll be asking and seeking input and providing answers that may or may not satisfy, but nonetheless, we'll seek to answer all of these questions and much more over the course of this podcast. My life has been a radical search for the truth. Throughout my life, with intermittent periods of certainty in which I thought I did, in fact, have the answers, in which I thought, in fact, that I knew more than I did know. But aside from those intermittent periods of arrogant certainty, I've been a seeker all my life. And to this day, the more answers I arrive at that satisfy my questions, that satisfy my curiosity, the more I know that my understanding, my awareness is partial and flawed. And those periods of certainty were regularly and systematically blown to bits. One of the ways in which this has happened is through scientific study. Aside from the theology degree and a life devoted to a study of the Bible and holy writings and their application and serving people by diving into those sources and providing help in some way, in whatever way I can, such as through this podcast series, I've been a subscriber to Scientific American for almost 20 years as well, reading every issue. The latest issue, which just arrived, had a picture of the Antikythera, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Antikythera, an ancient and, as it's quoted in the magazine, fiendishly complex calculator. Apparently, as described by Cicero, it was invented by Archimedes, a preeminent mathematician, who interestingly is known for the Archimedes principle, which is the displacement of water, which to me, it's interesting in that the same topic of studying the stars to know what God is doing in his prophetic timeline also does play into certain things like the Noachian flood. These are the weird associations that I often make as I study things. Many of them may lead down fruitless paths, but sometimes there are insights which are quite helpful. There's the cover of the magazine, which I took a few minutes ago. I was just reading this article last night It's a picture on the cover of the Antikythera, which is a fiendishly complex device to calculate the path of the planets, the path of stars. This is an ancient, sophisticated device in which you could go back and forward in time and predict where the stars would be and when eclipses would happen. And in the editorial message, it mentioned that this was not the first time that this device showed up on the cover of Scientific American, but that it in fact had been on the cover as far back as 1959, which prompted me on a hunch to go and dig for it. In reading with great interest about this previous appearance on the cover in 1959, I looked it up, and there it is. And sure enough, as my hunch told me, it was June 1959, which happens to be the year I was born. Of course, this is of great cosmic significance. I say half-heartedly, jokingly. My point is, in 1959, this was on the cover, and throughout my whole life, my whole lifetime, which is now increasingly elongated, people have been studying this device. The reason it appeared on the cover again is because of the recent discoveries with different imaging methods to get at the insides of this device and discover its working way back 200 years before the Common Era, if you believe this. It's still a theory that Archimedes is the inventor of this, but it answers questions. You can go look at Wikipedia right now or other sources. They have not been updated with this latest theory. All the time we are making new discoveries which enlighten our understanding of the past, even ancient history, near prehistoric history. The depth and breadth of understanding that we are gaining from scientific inquiry is unbelievable. So I don't want anyone for one moment to think that in this podcast, you've just got some disgruntled ex-fundamentalist minister ranting about how people don't believe in the Bible. That is not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about a radical search for truth, one that I have dedicated my lifetime to. Wherever that search has taken me, and it has taken me literally around the world, and through many, like I said, astounding situations, always looking for the deeper meaning, the deeper purpose, the deeper path. And I hope that as we get into this material, many of you will join me on that path of discovery. So let's jump into now the book of Genesis briefly, and I'll try to wrap all this up and tie it in with those opening verses of the book of Genesis in the Bible. But before we do, there are so many great tools out there. And if you're able to tune into this podcast, that means you have access to the internet. You have access to more information and knowledge and awareness than, all of humankind in past history. Turn the TV off, turn, whatever, turn the games off, whatever other, pastimes occupy you. Start developing an interest broadly in some of the topics related to these big questions about why you're here and whether or not a creator might have a purpose for you. Because in fact, the world with all its distractions seems almost demonically designed to keep you distracted, to keep you from discovering your true purpose. The truth is out there like never before. You don't have to be attached to some secret source of truth. You can begin searching anywhere, such as at BibleStudy.org or many other sites that you can find. There's a link here, a summary of the book of Genesis that I'm not going to go to right now. This is more as a reference of some of the information here of where I pulled it from, to just get an understanding, a general understanding of the book of Genesis. If you will, that might be some of the homework that you might want to do, because I am not in this podcast going to pedantically, like some professor, take you through all the background. I'm going to be hitting highlights as we go through this and pulling out thoughts, information based on a lifetime of research, which, as you can readily understand, we're not going to have time to do in this podcast. So things will be stated, and you'll be expected to have the ability to Google it if you don't trust it or don't believe it. But here are just a couple of highlights by way of setting the stage here. Genesis is the book of beginnings, the beginning of time, the beginning of life, the beginning of the human race, the beginning of sin, the beginning of salvation, and the beginning of the Hebrew nation. Why is that important? Because the Hebrew nation is, in fact, a thread of prophetic fulfillment in multiple ways. Not only are all the stories where these people are captured, warts and all, sins exposed to the world to see. This is better than the biggest drama that you've been watching on Netflix, right? Where you're into season 6 of some show, right? The book of Genesis and the stories of its heroes and villains has more to offer you than any of those things. It may not be, the production value may not be quite as great. The amount of money spent on giving you a visual thrill may not be there, but the content, the essential learnings and the knowledge that you can get from diving into it and figuring out what's going on today, not just based on, not just quote, based on real events, right? Or a Hollywood version of a story that maybe happened somewhere in some theoretical way. That's kind of how people look at the book of Genesis. Like those stories are ancient stories that, they're all just made up. They're myths. Yeah, we'll get into some of that as we get into the text. My point is looking at the book of Genesis with a certain credulity, with a certain acceptance, a certain belief that these were, even if you want to reject that in some cases they might have been real events, that they are real divine stories that have prophetic meaning and prophetic fulfillment down to our day and age today. Not only to provide you with lessons for life and an understanding of what kind of person you should be, but to understand the world in which you live. The creation, the fall, the flood, the dispersion of nations, the destruction of a toxic global unity, and then a discussion on how to achieve divine unity through obedience to God as a society. All of this and much more is all encapsulated in just that first book of the Bible. The title, the English title Genesis, comes from the Greek translation, which is known as the Septuagint. Genesis means origins, whereas the Hebrew title is derived from the Bible's very first word, transliterated Bereshit, which means simply in the beginning, which is the meaning of the first word. The authorship, with very few exceptions, Jewish and Christian scholars alike believe that Moses wrote Genesis. His authorship is supported by the Samaritan Pentateuch, the Palestinian Talmud, the Apocrypha, the writings of Philo and Josephus, cited here. We will get into things like the documentary hypothesis briefly, which seeks to show, based on some, in my opinion, magician's tricks, that the Bible or that the Torah was not written by Moses. You can turn to the point where Moses' death is described and claim, aha, I've got you. I've proven that Moses didn't write the Torah, because here it describes his own death. You're going to try to tell me that Moses described his own death? Well, who said that every single word had to be penned by Moses? Clearly, in the interest of editorial continuity, someone would have naturally wanted to append a few words about Moses' death at the end of his book. So, it's just that kind of attack that, when not contested and when not discussed, explained, and resisted, leads to us undermining and throwing out many babies with the bathwater. We'll get into a lot of that in more detail as we go through. I'm just giving you a few highlights by way of overview, and also to alert those who, this isn't really what you're looking for. This is the nature of this podcast. We are viewing the Bible as the Word of God. We're approaching it with a great deal of reverence, with a great deal of respect, and we're assuming that the Bible is accurate until really proven wrong, rather than the other way around. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more in the next couple of podcasts. But I want to move into some of the text tonight as we come here towards the end. Let there be light. This is, you could say, an overall theme from the entire collection of 66 books. Let there be light. Let's look at these first few words of Genesis. We'll unpack these in greater detail next time. I've spent a lot of time sort of laying the foundation of what this podcast is so that it's out there. These sessions, by the way, will not only be live streamed, they will also be recorded. They will form the basis of a curriculum and a Bible study guide that will be available for use throughout your communities. For anyone who wishes to leverage this set of podcasts and get a discussion going in your neighborhood or your region or your interest groups around the Bible to continue this discussion and accomplish some goals that we'll unveil over the course of this podcast series. So we haven't had much time tonight to get too much into the texts itself, but we will do a little bit of that and we'll unpack it in greater detail next time. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So right away, we have here a statement that, again, looked at through the modern lens, we can use this to compare and contrast with the very current theories around the origin of the universe. I'm not saying that the Bible was intended to be a scientific textbook. What I'm saying is that based on the limitations of the medium through which this was recorded, it is essentially accurate. What do I mean by that? This is quite a statement to make. What I mean by that is we do, in fact, we're not completely, my family and I, we are absolutely not Luddites that sequester ourselves and avoid all contact with the modern world. I do subscribe to Netflix, for example, and we often watch old movies. I had this sort of goal of watching all the movies that won an Oscar, just so I could understand American history from the lens of popular entertainment. And the production qualities of some of those early movies are laughable, right? They were working with the available medium of the time. Or I'm also a music fan, right? And I've got some recordings, very early recordings, like of some of the early blues artists and some, even some more recent stuff. The recording quality is quite terrible compared to modern recording standards. So based on what's available at the time, those who were seeking to record anything did the best job they could. What was God working with when he revealed this word? When the story of creation was first delivered to man, and wherever this originally came from, we do believe in that sense, based on what I just read and other things that we haven't had time to dive into, that Moses is the author of the Pentateuch. But that doesn't mean that he was the first person that told this story. You think there weren't creation stories around prior to Moses? And whether he was or was not the one that specifically compiled everything and redacted everything into a format, these stories go back so far that the concepts and even the language, even the words needed to record the message did not exist. And the underlying concepts did not exist. So the creator was limiting himself to delivering this message to and through the beings to whom he was trying to deliver the message. And so he couldn't very well have recorded words that weren't understood at the time, or concepts that were not capable of being translated into human language at the time. But one of the things that we will get into, and I'm going to move quickly through this now, so we will leave a lot to unpack next time, is that there is a demythologizing going on here. The selection of every word is clearly, for those with eyes to see, who are looking at this objectively with a desire to understand it from the perspective of it being true, right? Of there being a God, a divine being who is writing and recording these verses for mankind, to educate mankind, to move him forward. You can clearly see, as we will get into next time, a demythologizing taking place here. The exact opposite of the accusations and claims made against this language. I won't get into it now. We'll get into it a little bit more next time. Further, as we move on through the book of Genesis and through the stages of creation, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So you see here why I referred to the Antikythera earlier, that it was perhaps the crowning achievement of Archimedes, and that mankind has always studied the stars. Because right here, the divine creator reveals that he put that divine clock in place, the lights in the firmament of heaven, to function as a clock and to provide signs along the way. Let them be for lights, to give light. He made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And as a seeming throwaway comment, he made the stars also. They are integral into the overall functioning of the divine clock and the signs, and are necessary for the proper interpretation, as Archimedes was trying to do, if indeed it was Archimedes who created the Antikythera. And God set them to give light on earth and to rule over the day and the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the division, the separation of light from darkness, is a theme that we will get into in great depth and apply to everything we study as we go on this exploration through the Bible. Here there's the Hebrew word for sign, a flag, a beacon, a monument, an omen, a prodigy, evidence, a mark, a miracle, a sign, a token. These opening words are so transcendent from anything else available at the time, in which God is represented as a being that exists outside of time and space. In fact, the creator of time and space. Concepts which were not understood until Einstein, the famous provider of the quote, "I wish to know God's thoughts, the rest is detail." Not until many thousands of years later did we achieve the awareness and the understanding that is represented in these verses. And I dare say we have still not even mined the riches and the depth of this as a species. These most early, most ancient words continue to shed light, pun intended. And as we further calibrate through deeper space exploration, the divine clock, which was set to govern life on earth in times of light and in times of darkness, where mankind is on a path leading in a positive direction, and even in the deepest, darkest night. For anyone who seeks the answers, they are out there. The truth is out there. But without this compass, without this ancient mechanism delivered from a divine being who sought to give his creation the guidance that it needed to find its way and to find its path on the individual exploration and the collective exploration that we are engaged in, we have still not even really begun to understand the awesome, unbelievable majesty of the device that God set in motion. Archimedes may have spent his whole life creating that Antikythera, and it may have taken scientists my whole lifetime studying it to put it back on the cover of the Scientific American this month, which I was privileged to read last night and work into this presentation today. As time goes on, what we will discover and uncover will continue to be mind-blowing. I sincerely believe that this journey that we're embarking upon through this podcast and your participation in it will deliver that kind of insight. What we're doing here is kind of going off into uncharted territory You might view me as kind of a facilitator of this journey, but I present the evidence that this presentation was simply guided by the events that are surrounding us. You might put that off to a lack of preparation. I will assign it the evidence of divine guidance. This is where, getting back to, are we credulous? Are we looking for God to give us the answers? Or are we looking for those things that will allow us to dismiss and discount, to erode and undermine the Word of God? That, in a sense, is the introduction. I'm going to now stop sharing and skip over these last slides because I've certainly said enough. We may have a couple of minutes for Q&A. The live stream will end at 7, but for any of you who want to reach out afterwards, I will quickly reshare a slide that has my email, and you can reach out to me, and I or someone on the team will get back to you to further engage offline after the live stream. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong link there and jumped into the YouTube with all of you accidentally. Let me just quickly share this screen with my email on it and read it out to you for those who may not be viewing, maybe just listening. To continue this discussion, you can email me at Wade, W-A-D-E, at soupllc.com. Soup is the acronym for Something or Other Publishing. Therefore, it's soup, spelled with 2 O's, SOOP, LLC.com. Once again, Wade at soupllc.com. And I do look forward to hearing from you and continuing this discussion. Alex, any questions? Anything that urgently needs to be addressed in the last 3.1 minutes we have remaining?
Thank you, Wade. We do have just a quick question here. So, are you going to speak about strictly Baha'i topics, or are you open to discussing generally religious concepts?
This podcast has nothing to do specifically with the Baha'i faith. I will not be addressing any Baha'i specific topics on this podcast, except such as are introduced by those who would like to learn about the Bible.
Perfect. And then you mentioned audience participation. Are you open to having audience members jump in with you, just like I'm doing so right now?
Absolutely. Tonight, we didn't know who would show up. We weren't completely familiar with the technology, and we had a lot of sort of housekeeping material to cover. So that didn't really lend itself to tonight. I think over the next few episodes, we'll be looking to have perhaps a couple of, prepared participants so that we know who you are, just so we don't get off on the wrong foot with too much radical departure from the intended presentation. But generally speaking, the goal is to have about 25 to 30 minutes of a presentation and then a lot of discussion about that topic.
Cool. Thank you. And then John, welcome to the stage.
Hi there, Wade. Hi, Alex. So I have a question. When is our next session going to happen?
Every first and third Tuesday at
Every first and third Tuesday.
At 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 p.m. You get it. 6 p.m. Central Time, which is where I'm at, live. And we also, please do email me. We'll probably provide another email later and maybe in the chat feature or the comments so that we can create a mailing list and we can provide updates to anyone who wants to be on that mailing list. I'm an old dog. Alex and John and others are teaching me a few new tricks here about this whole integrated, live streaming internet world and how people connect or don't connect to a program. So we're learning as we go, but we'll try to accommodate keeping any and all of you informed as to what we're doing. We do want as many people along for the ride as we can.
So that means then our session that will resume this series. It will be February 1st, 2022, our second session. Beautiful. So one last question.
Well, go ahead.
The last question is, what are we going to do until that Tuesday? What should we read?
You can read the book of Genesis, especially chapter 1. You can go to BibleStudy.org. You can go to Bible Gateway is a favorite of mine. You can read up a little bit on the book of Genesis. You might look into what is mythology, what is epic history, anything of interest related to those ancient texts, and be ready to bring some questions about it. We're gonna really spend probably several podcasts just on the first chapter of Genesis.
Thank you very much for answering those questions.
Great questions, by the way.
So speaking of the technical side of things, so for those that are those of us that have enjoyed the conversation and presentation tonight, make sure that you go ahead and like and subscribe. So if you're watching on YouTube, just click the subscribe button and the like button, and then if you're on Facebook, just click the thumbs up. That really helps us. Thank you.
And feel free to, chat in those various sites. I'm not sure how all that works, but we're looking for a lot of engagement. We do have a team of a number of people who are here to support this across multiple states. Particularly, there's a group down in Florida, which I'm very privileged to have supporting this, and they're sharing it out on a Baha'i channel, because Baha'is have a mandate, frankly, to learn and study the Bible, and that mandate is often pushed into the background with all kinds of other, competing priorities, all of which are important. So I'm very grateful to that group and thankful that I can be a provider of information and content about the Bible. And then, as I mentioned, the publishing company that I founded, we are launching this through our YouTube channel, which already exists. We have an imprint called Royal Falcon Press, which deals with religious literature of all kinds, and very excited about that. So we'll continue to try to expand this initiative as we go, and very grateful to all of you who showed up here for the very first podcast. You can now all say you were there. Thanks, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.